Hello, everyone. We'll wait for just a few moments to let others filter in. If you could give us just a few minutes and we'll get things kicked off today. Thanks for joining us. Shreesh, all well?
Oh, well, how are you, Patrick?
Great, great, great. So good to hear your voice,
Awesome.
man. Faisal, there you are. Okay, guys, if you're open to it, we can go ahead and kick things off. I think we've probably given folks enough time to filter in. To those of you listening, thank you for joining us for the June 2024 session of TrustMasters Monthly. I again am your host, Patrick Sullivan. I want to not only welcome you today, but also two very special guests who we've asked to join us to talk a little bit about high trust and new relationships that A-LIGN is forming with Vanta. To that end, if I could introduce our two special guests today, Shreesh Bhattarai and Faisal Kahn. And Faisal, maybe you could kick us off and introduce yourself very briefly.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Patrick.
Of
It's a
course.
pleasure to meet you all. My name is Faisal, and I'm a GRC solutions expert here at Vanta. I help our customers with questions on all things GRC, especially framework adoption conversations as well. My decade-plus experience includes not only building my own security and compliance programs in the past, but also just being on the other side of and consulting on the same. Shreesh, I'll hand it over to you for your introduction.
Thanks, Faisal. Thanks, Patrick. Really excited to be on and for our dialogue today. So my name is Shreesh. I've been, I lead the HITRUST practice here at A-LIGN. Been with the company, 7.5 years now. It's time's going too fast, but we do everything from a readiness to advisory to, assessment assurance level work for all E1, I1, R2 assessments. I'll get into here in a second, but all thing HITRUST. So really excited for the conversation today.
Oh, thank you both so much for the intros. And very, very briefly, before we do jump into our dialogue and our agenda for today, to our audience, I do want to let you know that there is a Q&A section that you have access to throughout the duration of our session today. If you have questions, comments, feedback, please feel free to use that Q&A section. I don't know that we'll necessarily have an opportunity to address those questions or comments as we go, but very definitely if there's time at the end of our dialogue, we'll address as many of them as possible. So thank you. Thank you again. Now, Shreesh, Faisal, we've really set aside time today for us to come together to talk a little bit about high trust. And I know that's a very vague and undefined topic, but Shreesh, maybe you could help us understand a little bit more about what the market is thinking when they hear the word high trust.
Yeah. So I think let's go back, Patrick. Let's go all the way back to the inception of HITRUST, right? The year is 2007. You got leaders from all, major organizations, especially in the healthcare industry. They come together on a table and they realize a growing appetite for a framework that is very comprehensive, very robust. That is a certification, not an attestation, and we can get into the differences here in a second. But most importantly, that is evolving with the ever-changing cybersecurity landscape, right? All the threats that are emerging on a day-to-day basis. And that's when the HITRUST CSF was founded. And fast forward 17 years, we have one of the most recognizable, a gold standard of a security framework that's in the market today. And now there is a perception out there that HITRUST is this framework that is extremely rigorous in nature, that requires a lot of man hours, a lot of resources to conduct, is extremely expensive to conduct. Now, those perceptions do hold true, but with the very important caveat that they apply to the highest level of the HITRUST assessment, which now is known as the R2 assessment. So there are three types of HITRUST assessment, right? You got the R2, which has been the assessment since day one that HITRUST was incepted. It used to be called just the HITRUST validated assessment. Now it's called the R2 assessment. HITRUST over the last 5 years have done a tremendous job of taking feedback from the market and recognizing that, look, not all organizations fit the same risk profile. Not all organizations need to do the R2 assessment. at least to begin with. So 2021, they come up with the I-1 assessment, which is the moderate tier assessment. And then 2023, there is another assessment, which is the E1 assessment. It's a static, we'll talk about this in a little bit more here in a second. It's a static 44 requirement foundational level assessment. It's a great entry point for a lot of organizations. So if you're an organization that is up and coming, trying to establish a compliance program, you don't necessarily need to do the R2 assessment, right? Which is going to be an overhaul. You can get started with the E1, then grow your way up to the I1 and then the R2. So this flexibility now has allowed organizations from all shapes and sizes to get their toes and take the benefit from a HITRUST perspective. So,
and Shreesh, oh, go ahead, Faisal. I apologize.
I was just going to add on there, like, and also just to address some of the common perception of HITRUST itself being very healthcare focused, and that's absolutely true, right? If we think about inception of HITRUST as a framework, it was developed with that first and primary goal of addressing HIPAA's security rule requirements, which then quickly expanded to the privacy and breach notification rules. And over time, to Shreesh's point, it's become this very comprehensive framework that takes from several what they call authoritative sources, which are essentially other frameworks that they're pulling some of these compliance requirements from. So to Shreesh's comment, just as an addition, if you're trying to enter the healthcare industry especially and establish a very strong comprehensive control set for yourself, and we'll get into the specifics of E1 some more in a sec as well, entering in at the E1 and establishing your baseline for yourself is a good first step in trying to make your compliance program robust.
Faisal, I'm glad that you made that point, that HITRUST, even though it's perceived as a framework, a assessment that is only catered to the healthcare industry, it's not, right? We're seeing a lot of clients. It's HITRUST officially went kind of industry agnostic about 4 or 5 years ago, but now we see a lot of clients on a day-to-day basis here at A-LIGN that come to us and they say, yeah, we have systems in scope that we want to base our, we want to perform the HITRUST assessment. We don't hold any PHI. We have no healthcare data, but we see so much value in the robustness and the comprehensiveness of the HITRUST framework that we still want to do HITRUST, we want to use that as the gold standard for our internal compliance program. And that's great to see.
Oh my goodness. Now, really quickly, guys, you all have referred to framework. Shreesh, I think you use the acronym CSF. Just for my edification and the edification of the listeners, it stands for Cybersecurity Framework. Is that correct?
Security Framework. So it's the HITRUST CSF, HITRUST Common Security Framework.
Common Security Framework.
That's what was established. And to Faisal's point, right? HITRUST it incorporates a lot of other framework like ISO 27001, NIST 853. So we just needed one framework that, that kind of relied on all the other frameworks that are out there, and then came up with a consolidated framework that could be relied upon by the marketplace and seen as something that was just robust than the other ones.
By nature, it's built to be very prescriptive, right? If we think about just HIPAA as a good tangential, there might be a requirement for you to have strong password management authentication practices and language requirements and HIPAA regulations specifying as such. And of course, it'll go into depth of what's expected there. But a HITRUST equivalent of that, you can expect a lot more granularity, specific configurations that are expected from your passwords, alphanumerics, password rotation, things like that. So it gets a bit deeper and helps really establish a good implementation baseline for organizations and further mature into the wider HITRUST CSF frameworks, which I'm sure we'll cover in a sec too.
Well, and really quickly before we do talk about the other frameworks, well, as an aside to the conversation around other frameworks, are we seeing organizations use this CSF really as a foundation to build out and prepare themselves to undergo other assessments, to potentially pursue a SOC 2 attestation or an ISO certification? Is that something that you two are actually seeing as you work with customers?
Yeah, Patrick, I think that's a great question. I think a lot of what we see is kind of SOC 2 is kind of like the gateway drug, as we kind of say it here at A-LIGN. That's usually the first assessment that a lot of the customers do. They obtain that SOC 2 attestation. Then they probably add ISO 27001 certification. And then they're on their chair figuring out, all right, compliance, we know it's not one-stop destination, right? There's no finality to the compliance process. It's an ever-going thing. It's not even a marathon. It's an ultra marathon. You're signing up for a 100-mile race here. So what's next, right? I've done SOC 2. I've obtained ISO 27001 certification. What is that natural upgrade? And we'll get into the E1 assessment, right? That's the lower tier HITRUST certification route. But HITRUST becomes that next framework that you can add. Now, I've also seen some companies that are up and coming starting to go the other way. They're like, now that I have, I'm a startup company, we grew too fast. That's what happens with startups.
Every time.
Program. I got to start somewhere. Why don't I use the HITRUST as a baseline? And then once I've done that, obtain an E1 certification, all right, then I go add a SOC 2. Then I go add an ISO 27000. So I'm slowly seeing that as well. But historically speaking, it's the other way around. Faisal, is that what you see on your end?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think to put a bow on it, Shreesh said it very well. It's becoming a standard for the starting point of how you comply you do once and you comply in multiple facets, right? And that just speaks to the nature of the breadth of HITRUST framework that they built out in the common security framework as a whole, right? At the assessment type aside, it's so vast in terms of how many different authoritative sources it pulls from that it creates the ability to really just do it once and hit a couple of different milestones at the same time in your compliance journey. So absolutely. And to Shreesh's point on kind of the ever evolving landscape of compliance, we think about just the way that a HITRUST approaches versioning in terms of always iterating on the versions that they've deployed. It's very threat adaptive and forward looking, and their aim to really keep their framework as up to date as possible relative to the threat actors that are out there and the new compliance requirements that might be existing. Take AI as a good example, right? We think about AI. In version 11.2 that got published, you see NIST AI RMF. That's NIST AI risk management framework, and guidance from that incorporated into the common security framework. ISO 3001, if I remember correctly, and another ISO framework that all are around AI risk management. And we can expect that just to continue to evolve as well, because that's all part of the idea of HITRUST frameworks, to keep up with malicious actors and compliance requirements and make sure that they have this robust standard for organizations to use.
And so you guys have talked about the framework and how different authoritative sources can be pulled together to allow organizations to create a framework, a controls framework, to build against inside their organization. Shreesh, you very plainly said, at least to me, that this standard or this tool set is being adopted by more than just covered entities and business associates. We're seeing people outside the healthcare space altogether actually pursuing HITRUST certification. Now, one of the things that you hit on, and we said that we would come back to, are the different types of certifications through HITRUST. You had mentioned an R2, an I1, an E1. Maybe you could tell our listeners just a little bit about those different certifications and really their utility for the overall market.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, right? So R2 is this gold standard that everybody aspires to get to eventually. That's the hardest assessment. That's the most comprehensive HITRUST assessment that's within their portfolio. Then you have organizations that are maybe they have systems that process or transmit or store PHI or PII, but they're not in the same level of the risk profile as other companies that may require to do an R2. So they fit into this moderate level of assurance I1 assessment. It's a static 182 control assessment, which has gotten very, very popular. That's the I1. By the way, the R2 depends on the scope, like how many requirements will be assessed in an R2 is contingent upon various different factors, like how many records does your system hold? How many transactions do you process on an annual basis, right? Those things factor in. But I1 and E1, I want 182. Go ahead, Patrick.
Well, just to be plain before we move on, so an R2 assessment for company A may be different than an R2 assessment for company B? Yeah. Interesting.
An average assessment, you're looking at about 280 to 300 requirements. That's an average R2 assessment.
Okay.
But you also have organizations that just have a lot of records in their system, right? More the records in your system, if they were to be breached, more the risk. Hence, more the requirements that you have to show that you are compliant against. So you'll see assessments in the 400s, 500s, 600s. We do some that are in the 700 to 800. So let's not scare our audience with that, right? So an average is about 280 to 300 requirements. I want static, right? Whether you're a startup company or whether you are a Amazon, 182 is what you're going to get in an I1.
Whew, that seems much more
doable. E1, right, is 44 foundational essential security requirements. So a lot lower level of work that you are committed to performing. And we'll talk about the synergies with SOC and ISO and how much extra work you need to do to obtain an E1. But yes, those are the three different portfolio assessments that HITRUST offers: R2, I1, and E1. And E1 is really, man, it's probably the most popular assessment there is because of the lower barrier to entry. You don't have to it doesn't cost you as much. It doesn't require months and months of time to perform that assessment. So those are probably the differences there, Patrick.
And Shreesh, I might be misinterpreting the data that I see, but I do see a lot come through wherein customers that are doing an E1 are also doing a SOC 2 for the same scoped environment. I mean, help me understand that. Are there synergies? Are there overlaps between an E1 and a SOC 2? Is there something driving that?
Yeah, 100%. So this is the main question. So when I get on sales calls, when I talk to my prospective clients or existing clients, they're like, Shreesh, like, I've heard all of this E1, I've heard of this I1, R2 stuff. I do SOC, I do ISO. Just break it down for me in simple math, right? How much am I committing myself in adding an E1 to my portfolio of an existing SOC 2 and an I1, or existing SOC 2 and an ISO? And so I brought some numbers for you here. So if you've successfully completed an ISO certification, from a documentation standpoint, you're 100% of the way there, right? There's not any additional documentation that you have to showcase. Now, given that you have a very tidied up documentation that you're showcasing on an ISO 27001 certification, for HITRUST, you are solid.
Wow.
HITRUST tends to be a little more population heavy, right, than SOC and then ISO. But by having done an ISO certification, you are approximately 35% of the population, right? You have 35% of the population that is needed, and all you got to do is provide the delta to satisfy the E1 assessment. Same with the sample evidence. You're about 35% of the way there. And for general evidence, right, the ones that you're talking about, reports and screenshots, point in time evidence, you're about 40% of the way there from an ISO perspective, ISO to an E1 synergy level. For SOC, again, 100% of the documentation, you were there, right? Population percentage is a little higher than ISO. It kind of lands about 42%. And then 36% on the sample evidence. So as you can see, the synergies are extremely appealing, right? So by doing just a little bit of extra work, you're easily obtaining an E1 certification, and you're bolstering your security posture by adding that E1 to your compliance program in addition to the SOC and the ISO.
Wow. And Shreesh, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I feel like you just said this. So, but ultimately what I do hear you saying is, to your point, for just a little extra work, organizations can bring in even more validation and more independent assurance through, in this case, HITRUST certification, that they are doing responsible and mature things to protect the security of their customers' data. That's absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal.
And I think, I mean, when I talk to organizations, it's the security aspect is definitely highlighted because that's what we care about. Why does somebody do high trust? It's to bolster your security, right? As an organization, you never want to be standstill. You always want your compliance program to be maturing. It's a continuous monitoring, continuous enhancing your security posture. So that's what that provides. But also on the other side of the coin, you've done SOC, you've done ISO. By adding that E1, by adding that HITRUST certification logo to demonstrate to your vendors, to your prospective vendors that you also have another certification, that's got to open up a lot of doors from an ROI perspective as well. So from a business side, it's a win. From a compliance security side, it's a massive win. So
the logo speaks for itself. Yeah. It is a attestation to just the maturity of the organization at that point in time, especially when we think about just the layers of assurance that kind of go into it, right? If we think about the audit processes for some of our industry standard frameworks, and we think about, hey, how organizations, they'll go through this process, get ready for a framework, and they'll go to their auditors to assess them against those relative framework requirements. HITRUST takes that a step further, right? Not only do you need to have an assessor to validate those things, but the HITRUST themselves are actually involved in that QA process and making sure that those things are being met from a compliance perspective too. And if there was something that they caught in their QA, they kick it back to the assessors. And you guys could probably speak to it way more in depth to that than I could, for sure.
Yeah. One thing I want to add, Faisal, really quick. I kind of said this on the outset of the meeting here, is that the difference between an attestation and a certification, right? Mm-hmm. That's the appeal. When these founders came together back in 2007 and said, hey, we need something that is certifiable, that puts one extra layer of reliability. It's not the third-party firms like us that is issuing the report, right? Once we perform the audit, once we perform the attestation or the assessment, it is being looked at by another set of assessors, which is the HITRUST Alliance. They're making sure that you are turning in quality level of assessment before somebody has a chance to get certified. So that extra layer of vigilance is what separates HITRUST from any other attestation report that's out there. It's not even close.
And I was just going to say, I heard on another HITRUST webinar related to that. It's like, not only is it if we think about HITRUST as an organization in terms of these three, right? There's three parties, but even within HITRUST, there are additional bodies of QA that just go through this validation. It just shows that level of assurance checking and making sure that things are operating as they should according to the framework that was written. Sorry, so guys, back to you.
Oh, no, thank you, Faisal. And honestly, as you all are saying this, I'm starting to associate HITRUST with diligence, with maturity, with vigilance, with real professionalism. And Faisal, to that end, your organization, Vanta, has just formalized a partnership with HITRUST. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100%.
You care to tell us a little bit about that, man?
Yeah, 100%. So, before I do that, I'd just like to give a brief overview of Vanta themselves and just talk about how we play into the mix, right? So, Vanta as a whole, we're a trust management platform at its core with several functions that are necessary for security and compliance programs to be built. Automated compliance is one of those offerings that we offer for several frameworks that we provide out of the box. In our partnership with HITRUST, we've built the HITRUST E1 framework as an out-of-the-box framework. We're first to market in terms of as an automated compliance solution to offer a pre-built HITRUST assessment framework and have this exclusive partnership with HITRUST, which is awesome. We've taken the list of 44 controls that you see that are required as part of the E1 assessment, and we built those out in our platform, pre-mapped them to relative documents and automation tests, which is a core part of the Vanta vision, is trying to make sure that we pull in from any tech stacks that you've integrated with our platform and pull in any information, run tests so that the entities that are trying to get assessed are doing the least amount of work possible. We also provide documents and policy templates that are written explicitly for written explicitly for security and compliance programs as a whole, but also considering HITRUST specific requirements as well, which are captured in additional addendums as well. So very much so, really building on this relationship to provide a automated compliance vision for organizations where possible relative to what can be automated, right? Because the reality is not 100% of things can be automated.
Right.
You can do your best and get to as close as you can be, but it's all with this vision of trying to streamline operations in terms of complying with frameworks, E1 and other frameworks at large.
My goodness. And then Faisal, the partnership with HITRUST, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of potential value for organizations that choose to pursue their E1 through the Vanta platform. How does that look when it relates to Vanta's partnership with A-LIGN? You know, one of the ideas that we're really trying to ensure the market understands is that to be successful, there really is a three-legged stool, if you will, three pillars of success as it relates to building and executing on a compliance program that is strong GRC or platform partners like Vanta, strong advisory partners to help build where controls don't exist or where vision isn't yet happening, and then strong audit partners like A-LIGN to step in and actually assess when organizations are ready to walk through the attestation or certification assessment process. You know, as you think about this new relationship or these new relationships, are there any kind of synergies that you see that are going to be immediate benefits for those that choose to participate?
Yeah, of course. And this kind of goes into benefits, but also benefits of having this partnership, but also then just how does it all work end to end, right? HITRUST, when we think about MyCSF, the HITRUST platform, HITRUST framework itself, A-LIGN is the assessor, and then ultimately HITRUST QA component, right? Like, how does it all work?
Yes.
And the reality is it's primarily based on this whole automated compliance vision and centralized view to get compliant with the framework that you're trying to achieve. And in this case, HITRUST E1. We are also going to support I1 and R2 in the near future as well, which is going to further expand just our offering there in terms of highlighting the partnership, which is going to be a great value add to organizations across the board. But to get, I was just going to get even more specific into just the roles at play here. You have, as I was mentioning, the assessor, you have HITRUST QA, and you have the assessed entity, right? And the assessed entity, in this case, would use a compliance management platform like Vanta to do that readiness portion of this HITRUST journey to make sure that they're hitting the right boxes. Where we leverage our trusted partners, A-LIGN, to go in and perform some of those validated assessments based off of what they've completed in Vanta to go in and comply with those controls. From there, it goes to HITRUST, and that's the HITRUST component from a QA perspective, where HITRUST will also need to see, to what we were saying earlier, what's been undergone in terms of the validated assessment. Yes. And it creates this one central flow as far as a compliance journey.
And a single pane of glass to start from, Faisal, which I think for organizations, for users, is just a critical component. Shreesh, I think you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, right, the relationship is of three quality organizations kind of coming together, right? Yeah. Faisal, Vanta puts organizations in a very good spot getting ready for the HITRUST assessment. We come in, we perform the best quality audit based on the stringency that HITRUST has put forward. All that goes into HITRUST. They review our work, everything looks good, client gets certified. So it's a very nice, seamless triangle relationship that we are very, very proud of being part of. It's just incredible.
And I'd be remiss not to say this, that, you know, the focus in the last few comments have been around HITRUST, but based on what you two have told us, there's also downstream benefit as it relates to ISO 27001, as it relates to SOC 2. I mean, it really does feel like it's win-win across the board as organizations transition and shift their focus to really building into partnerships like ours.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, and Faisal, correct me if I'm wrong here, if keep me honest. So that's where the synergy play comes in, Patrick, is let's say an organization is already on the Vanta platform. They're already doing a SOC 2. They're already doing an ISO, or maybe they're already doing an E1, but they're not doing a SOC 2 and ISO. Just think about how easy now it would be to just tag on another framework, right? Just
got it.
There. And
You got it.
with the beauty. So expanding your compliance program has never been easier. Thanks to Vanta.
What's really, really crazy, Shreesh, that your wording here is exactly how we in the audit industry have thought of this for years. It's just tagging on. Let's just tag on an ISO.
It sounded great. Now we're doing it.
Right. And that's the thing, you know, for us, it's been easy to say because we know what goes into making it happen. For organizations that are focused on other things, this is all overwhelming and this is all scary and this is all things that they don't necessarily want to think about. So what I see happening now in this transition and this maturation of relationships is now it's just that easy for organizations to do as it is for us to say, which is just beautiful. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, and that's part of Vanta's value prop too, right? The Vanta platform is built with those out-of-the-box frameworks and pre-built with those mappings cross-board in terms of ISO, SOC 2, HITRUST E1, and in the future the other HITRUST validated assessments as well. The whole vision is you're doing it once to comply multiple times, and we approach that just so that we can make sure that people have that central pane of glass, as you were mentioning, Patrick, to achieving compliance and also bolstering your security posture.
And guys, the present looks like a great, great place to be as it relates to HITRUST certification, taking on new certification and growing compliance programs. But fellas, what do you think about the future? Where are things going with the HITRUST Alliance? You know, I do a lot of talking about AI and AI governance today, not necessarily in the context of HITRUST, but Shreesh, Faisal, to my understanding, HITRUST is actually making some moves in this area as well. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I can go first, Faisal. So on the AI front, there are a couple of ways of obtaining some level of AI compliance report from HITRUST. So I'll give you the short term and the long term here. So starting very soon, probably sometime late July, is if you're performing a R2 assessment, if you're certifying a R2 assessment within HITRUST, you can add what it's called a regulatory framework, which is kind of a lingo word for HITRUST, add on to your R2 certification. And you can publish a AI report. It's called the AI Insight Report for AI risk management piece, and provide that to whoever is asking for an AI accreditation. So that's the AI Insight Report possible for organizations that are going through an R2 certification. That's going to start happening here in the next month.
Shreesh, is that a certification or is that a
certification? It's an Insight Report already kind of taken out from your existing HITRUST certification.
Okay.
So by adding this regulatory framework to the existing certification, you're just adding some level of requirements that pertain to artificial intelligence risk management program. That's what we're right now. But what you're leading is HITRUST going to have a separate AI certification for the marketplace to utilize? And the answer to that is yes. But the timeline is probably you're looking at Q4 of this year, where HITRUST is going to come out with a separate HITRUST certification just catered to AI.
Wow.
So that's going to be a game changer. Now, I'm probably going to spill the beans here. I was going to talk about, what's next. HITRUST has this biggest conference, and this is a plug for them and plug for us. We'll be there. HITRUST Collaborate in October, first week of October, October 1st to October 3rd. So if you're in the audience here today and you're aspiring to do HITRUST at some point, if you're catering to the healthcare market, if that's your aspiration is to cater to the healthcare market at a certain point, it's a no-brainer, right? You should start with an E1, I1, R2 at some point. And so this HITRUST Collaborate conference is a must-go. And that's probably when this is going to be announced formally. is that AI certification is coming soon.
Wow. And then Shreesh, just so I don't not do credit to the insight report, as you're describing the insight report, I see a potential use case being those customers that are currently undergoing R2 certification. Perhaps a vendor says, that's great, but I need to know what you're doing to responsibly manage AI
now.
Right now. And so in that instance, to generate the insight report would potentially satisfy that customer request.
100%. 100%.
Awesome.
Right now it's only R2, Patrick, but probably in late Q3. I was just talking to the VP of standards over there at HITRUST earlier today. So the goal is to get this expanded to an I1 as well as an E1 assessment. So you have a lot of organizations that would not be excluded by not having done the R2. They can do an I1, they can do an E1, still integrate this AI insight report out of their assessment. So great.
Management becomes much, much easier. Shreesh, it's okay if you don't know, but do you happen to know what framework is being evaluated for that insight report? Is it the AI RMF?
Correct. I think there's a working session going on right now with assessors and other bodies. So they're coming up with, hey, what requirement are we even talking about that would be encapsulated in that AI certification? So all of that discussion is happening right now. That's hence the big release probably in Q4. And so they're taking the time to come up with how that assessment is going to shape out to be.
And since the NIST AI RMF is a current regulatory factor in my CXF, is that what's being used for the insight report?
That's what's been used for the AI insight report. But obviously that's going to be expanded when you're talking about a true separate cert, that is going to line up independently to your existing certifications.
And then Shreesh, I mean, that sounds like a lot, but I feel like HITRUST is also making some additional moves. I think I saw a press release, something along those lines around cyber risk insurance. Am I making that up, or is that something to talk about?
No, you're not making that up. There's a lot going on. So it's probably hard to kind of wrap your head around, all the new flashes that we probably see on social media. Cyber insurance, yes. So HITRUST has partnered with Triumph Cyber. They're a special insurance underwriter to introduce a cyber insurance product. And these products are exclusively for HITRUST certified customers. I was just at the Frisco headquarters of HITRUST a couple of weeks ago, attending the Assessor Council meeting, and Triumph Cyber was there talking about the cyber insurance. And so the goal right now, and I didn't realize that, organization, how popular it is, how lucrative it is for organizations to try to get to that cyber insurance. I didn't even know that, the numbers we were talking of, majority of the clients do want to get cyber insurance. They're just not qualified to get one. Right. So now the pitch is you get HITRUST certified, R2 for right now. It's going to expand to an E1 and I1 as I talk to them. So if you're a R2 certified customer, you're going to get massive discounts in order to enroll in this cyber insurance. And so by integrating HITRUST rigorous standards with Triumph Cyber's expertise, HITRUST is just trying to address the growing complexities, right, in the cyber insurance market, offering more consistent and measurable and just a reliable risk management tool. And that just didn't exist. So HITRUST is making grounds, in a lot of different areas, and cyber insurance is just the next one, which is fantastic.
Oh my goodness. And guys, as I look at kind of our management for the webinar itself, I see we've got a little over 5 minutes left. So I think it's probably time I ask, are there things that we haven't talked about today? Any kind of closing thoughts you want to be sure we leave our listeners with so that they can walk away knowing that they've gotten as much information as they possibly can to make good decisions about potentially pursuing or continuing to certify against the HITRUST standards?
I have one thing, but I'll let Faisal go because it seems like I've talked for the last 10 minutes. So Faisal, you go.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. My closing thoughts here would be when we think about accomplishing a HITRUST certification. Like the levels in which you have E1, I1, and R2. They're actually built now so that you can start from one place and then make a journey up the levels, right? So if you do E1 as a framework and use that as your entry point into the HITRUST common security framework, you can start there, and your next level up to I1 will be that delta between the 181 static controls and the 44 controls that you had to begin with, and why it's supposed to be this maturity growth pattern, right? So for those interested in HITRUST that maybe don't have an explicit, hey, I must be I1 or R2, but need some level of HITRUST, some level of a HITRUST certification, or need something that gives them a good foundation for security control implementation, that's what E1 is, and highly recommend that, just because it includes what organizations should be doing for their security and compliance programs at a minimum. And then from there, achieve those higher goals from I1, R2, and so on and so forth. And take a look at Vanta to help with that journey. We can help streamline the E1, and as I1 and R2 are released, we can help with that as well.
And I want to provide one statistic, Patrick, that basically encapsulates everything that we've talked about in the value of adding an E1, I1, R2, whatever it is, HITRUST assessment to your compliance portfolio. So HITRUST published their inaugural trust report that came out about a couple of months ago, right? And it has a lot of good details on, you know, all the risk that is trending in the market, the impact of the HITRUST assessment, a lot of the good stuff in there. And that's publicly available. So if you're very interested, you guys can Google that. But one statistic that I want to provide is that over 2022 and 2023, right? So the year 2022 and 2023, only 0.64% of organizations that received HITRUST certifications reported a security breach to HITRUST in their certified environment over that same period.
Less than 1%.
So less than 1%, right? So 99 point whatever the math is did not. That is incredible, right? So that's just a testament to the robustness of the security framework and HITRUST's unwavering commitment, right, to leading the industry in basically data protection standards. So, you know, as you can see, I mean, the value of this assessment, I cannot talk highly enough. And that's probably one thing that I'll try to take out from this conversation is that it just, value is at the all-time level. What used to be a hard assessment in the past is no longer the case. And we have partners like A-LIGN and Vanta that are at your doorstep in helping you achieve that goal.
And guys, for me, thematically, you know, a few things have continued to come up. Common security framework, integrated controls, Faisal single pane of glass. You know, more and more this idea of integration and consolidation as we think about audit and compliance work, real GRC work in our environments is becoming more and more prominent. In our 2024 benchmark report, one stat that stood out that was just so glaring, 96% of our respondents recognized that consolidating that effort would make their lives better, that they would see gains in efficiency, they would see gains in lowering risk, lowering costs, just general benefits across the board. So 96%, but only about 20% were executing on that. And I think in large part, that's because organizations just don't know how to get started through this consolidation process. And so to hear you two talk, Faisal, about the work Vanta is doing with HITRUST, Shreesh, about the work that we're doing with Vanta, more and more I see that partnerships are really what can make the difference for organizations that are looking to take that step forward and actually mature their compliance programs to be value creators, not cost centers inside their organizations. So guys, thank you so much for making that very, very clear for me and hopefully clear for our listeners, because moving forward, consolidation of effort will absolutely be necessary for companies to continue to do what they need to do to provide trust to their downstream customers, to provide trust all the way through their value chains. So thank you. Now, everyone, we have about 1 second I think we're on time. So we won't actually have an opportunity to hit the Q&A. It looks like some of our Q&A questions have been answered through chat during the session, but I'll commit to everyone that's listening that we'll get these questions and we'll follow up with some direct responses. Until next month's TrustMasters, should you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Faisal, Shreesh, if you don't care for me to volunteer you, if you have any questions for Faisal or Shreesh, please don't hesitate to reach out. Now, if you could stay on for just a minute or two after the webinar ends, we do have a survey for you. We would love to get your feedback on this session and give us ideas about how we can improve through our next sessions. But nonetheless, thank you everyone for investing your time with us today. We're very, very grateful for you. Hope you have a great day.